Welcome everyone. The topic for the day is fire safety hazard, the risk thereof, and the control procedures we may implement. So we'll talk about everything around fire. So we will understand the definitions of fire. We will possibly source what are the causes of fire hazards, identify the techniques for fire hazards, and definitely, as the topic says, we'll talk about the control and preventions around it. So remember, the icons that has been given around here is all about fires, and this might be applicable to some different countries that we follow around it. Not every country would be imposing these kind of fires, but probably we'll talk about the fires alarm systems or the thing that has been notified every now and then. So we will talk about the fire. Let us begin. First and the foremost thing around here, it's the bulk storage tank, and we keep on hearing fires about the various petroleum products that comes around it, and there are mishappenings in every country. This happens almost once in a blue moon, probably in a decade, probably every 5 years, but it happens, and this might be because of the human error or anything. Apart from it, believe me, there have been fire that has been raged around even on the ocean when we are transporting. The ship might malfunction or things might go. There might be spillage, there might be fire, there might be outages that comes around it. So this is one of the basic thread that keeps on happening, and every year, almost every year, if not every year, every alternative year around the globe, such kind of incident happens at least once. So that is what we are talking about. It fire on petroleum bulk. It happened in probably in Indonesia. It happens even in US. It happens in Russia. It happens in Europe. We had it in Turkey last time that we did it. We'll talk about the fire hazard. What are the conditions that favors the development of fire? Please understand this thing. This is very relevant. So what is a fire hazard is what we're talking about it. Now, first and the foremost thing, there are three elements that require. What are the three elements? We talk about the oxygen, the fuel, and the heat. If the heat is the combustion that goes around it, the fuel is the food that comes around it, and for sustaining it, we require the oxygen. So we require three things to start and sustain fire: oxygen, fuel, and heat. So because oxygen is naturally, obviously present in our environment, fire hazard usually involves mishandling of either of these two things, which is fuel and heat. In all probabilities, there are fuels, there might be absence of heat, but due to of some laxity on the human part, the heat actually, and there's a combustion that actually take place, and it leads to a catastrophic effect. So fire or combustion is a chemical reaction between oxygen and the fuel, the combustible fuel we're talking about. In mostly cases it would be petroleum products that we're looking into it. To start a fire, we require an ignition such as a spark, probably a flame, or even high temperatures is sufficient enough. That will actually ignite the fire, that will actually initiate the fire. The ignition temperature goes around it. This needs to be understood always and everywhere. So what is a that comes around? So fire at combustible triangle, again, this is the triangle that we talk about. It is the oxygen, the heat, and probably the fuel that comes around it. The fire triangle or the combustible triangle that we look into it. Can we eliminate this? Cannot be eliminated because it is ever present out there. So can we isolate either of the combustion or the fuel? If we can do it, probably things is taken care of. So we need to understand, by removing, obsoleting any one of them and isolating any one of them will actually be doing around it. Oxygen is very difficult, it is omnipresent in the atmosphere. So we need to isolate either the heat part or the fuel part, or we need to handle them very carefully. Without sufficient heat, remember, a fire cannot begin, it cannot sustain. Heat can be removed by the application of other substances, which reduces the temperature. Obviously, yes, for the fire reaction. Now, what is the reducing temperature? One of the most common thing is W. W stands for water. This is of water. Yeah, we have stated around it, which requires the heat from phases from water to steam, actually removing the temperature part about it, introducing sufficient quantities and types of powder or gases in the flame reduces the amount of heat. available for the fire reaction in the same manner. Remember, turning off the electricity in an electrical fire engine removes the ignition sources in the very first place. So we need to be very sufficient. We should need to understand what causes the fire, what sustains it, and how to isolate those sustenance or the cause factor in the very first place. The foremost thing is we need to reduce the temperature. One of the reducing component of temperature is water. Apart from water, there might be fire which might be ignited with the help of, let's say, electrical fire. If you apply water to it, it becomes much more conducive altogether. We need to utilize sand in that kind of thing scenario. There are other powders that is available for removing the around here. Without fuel, remember, without fuel, a fire cannot burn, cannot sustain. Fuel can be removed naturally. As on when the fire has consumed all the burnable fuels, or manually or mechanically, probably even chemically, removing the fuel from the fire is one of the best solution. So fuel separation is an important factor in fire suppression and is the basis for major tactics such as the controlled burn, the fire stops, and because lower concentration of the fuel vapors in the flame leads to a decrease in energy. Remember, this is what we are looking into it, lowering the temperature. We are only looking into lowering the temperature. Removing the fuel thereby decreases the heat by leaps and bounds. So we need to understand, can we isolate or can we eradicate together? Next, the last but the not the least, I keep on saying that oxygen is omnipresent. Definitely, without oxygen, a fire just cannot breathe. A fire is as dead as anything else. It cannot sustain. Forget sustain. It cannot begin. Forget begin. It cannot continue. You name it and you have it. So, with a decreased oxygen concentration, the combustion process slows down in a very fast fashion. So if there's a plenty of fuel left when a fire goes out, so it's most commonly not a major factor that comes around it. So that is how we go around it. Now, what are the sources? I have been classifying at least five categories of fire: A, B, C, D, and probably the special categories. Which is the special categories are extremely active oxidizers or mixtures of oxygen and nitric acid, hydrogen, probably with which all combustible things, improvised explosive devices have been made around it, which is a solid missile propellant is the special category. We are designing this thing for having an explosion altogether, which can be a mixing of oxygen, nitric acid, hydrogen peroxide, and other things. So, what is? Let us come to the very basic thing. Now, one is the Class A fire, which can be ignited at the end of the in your domestic houses also in terms of solid wood material, in terms of wood, plastics, textile, clothing. Then comes the flammable thing, Class B fire. This is where we are talking about the liquid terms, right? Remember, liquid and gases. We are talking about petroleum, and the various products of petroleum. Let's say kerosene, one of the things, and so on and so forth. Class C fires is what has been done with the help of an electricity, which includes anything which has been initiated by electricity as such. Last but not the least would be the Class D fire, which is combustible, easily oxidized. There are certain material which actually has an affinity for oxygen and actually creates a high temperature. We are talking about aluminum, magnesium, titanium, and zirconium. So that is what A, B, C, D classification are all about it. Apart from the special categories which we actually create for our. So, what can be fuel? Fuel can be in all the three states, be it solid, liquid, and gases. Let us say the solids are wood, plastic, textile, and paper. In terms of liquid, would be petrol, diesel, kerosene, etc., etc. Gases would be ammonia and carbon dioxide. So, we will look at the pictograph that comes around here, which tells you exactly what we are looking at it. So, this is what we are talking around it. Here, we need to understand how to isolate either of the solid or of the liquid or the so that the fire hazard has been avoided. So flammable liquids, what we are looking into it, how we can categorize them. There are three points that we can go about it: the flash point, the fire point, and the auto ignition point. The lowest of temperature for a given fuel at which the vapors are produced in sufficient concentration to flash the presence of the source of ignition. This is what is the flash point. If we can reduce the temperature, make it frozen down or make it cool enough, because any rise in the temperature might lead to the ignition part of it. Fire point is a bare minimum temperature in which vapor continues to burn and become a source of ignition, remember. And the last part will be the lowest point at which vapors of the liquid self ignite without even a requirement for a ignition sources. So that is what we are looking around in. Remember, flammable gas to flammable liquid, which we have classified out here. Absolutely. So this is all about acetone, diesel, ethanol, methanol, and so on and so forth. That so sources of fire hazard. What are the sources? Number one is the failure of electrical system. Definitely, if there are any short circuit, it comes around it. The lightning strikes, which happens in a nature more often than not. Presence of flammable gases, yes. Liquids, yes. Petrol and all. Hot surfaces, definitely yes. We're talking about furnaces, chimneys, anything which has a high temperature. We're talking about the hot engines. It can be your automobile. We're talking about it. It might lead to fire. We keep on hearing news of some automobile get automatically catching for fire, and that is because of the high temperature, heated surface, and so forth. So let us identify how to go around it. First of the hazard would be your ignition sources. This is what is very important. The ignition and the fuel sources, if we can do around it. Now identify who are the people who are at risk. So the first and the foremost thing would be your visitors who are not aware of the requirements in that particular area, the workers who are actually playing and have the full know-how, but at times they are become susceptible to such kind of accident, and definitely physically challenged staff and guests that we are looking into it. So how do we reduce or evaluate the hazards altogether? Number one, replace strong ignition sources with a weaker one. If at all, if you have to have a ignition sources, can we have a weaker one? Why? Because this will give us enough time to prepare ourselves, and any mishaps due to of overlooking or any lethargic or any malpractices that might actually happen will not lead to a major casualty. So we require to have our ignition source which is the weaker things, so everybody will take proper precaution, they will have proper time to react, and so on and so forth. Use a less flammable fuel sources. It should not catch fires and fire at very fast. Then evaluate the protection and measures. Now what we can do have is a fire exit, fire alarms, fire extinguisher, fire doors that has come across this. Fire doors will prevent the fire from moving from one room to another or one level of building to another level of building. Then we can always record, plan, training, everything that can be given around it, and review of all these products that comes around it. So we need to understand these fire hazard and how to mitigate fire hazard. Let us understand to how to evaluate, review, and reduce the hazard. Number first thing, accidentally or caused by act or omission deliberately. This is what needs to be understood. Is it an offshoot of a human error? If it is so, can we reduce it? So risk of the fire spread is convection, conduction, and radiation. People might be only affected by the sheer heat of the fire. Is what is conduction, convection, probably radiation that comes around it. So how do we reduce it? Number one, the fuel sources, the oxygen sources. If we can remove the ignition part, if we can separate those ignition things, the ignition sources, the fuel sources, the ignition, these three things, remember I have been trying to tell it to you, these three things are of the paramount importance that comes around it. And if the people in the vicinity of the fires, if they take adequate fire precaution protections, so we need to come with the recording part of it. Now this is where we need to understand that not a single product, not a single procedure is the correct one. We need to keep on changing and tuning it to the requirement. And believe me or not, it changes from time to time. So there's no particular which is correct format. We need to understand the emergency plans. What is the emergency plan? It is what basically what is to be done in case certain things happens around it, whom to inform about it. Absolutely, this is what you got to go. Take, pull in your resources, inform everybody, sensitize everybody. Step 5, 5.3 would be to come up with a joint cooperations and strategies to mitigate such kind of hazard. Whatever information that you receive, always have an open mind. Keep it clear, keep it crystal clear, because it is your cooperation which can reduce or probably defer any accident. Last but not the least would be your training. Understand the emergency procedures, the exits, and so on and so forth. What happens and what is to be done, how to control across it. So, fire hazard and prevention strategies. We come to the fag end of the presentation, in which we are talking about the fire hazard control process. Now, we will be talking about um, what is to be done. First and foremost thing, we need to take a peculiar study of the workplace. Look at it, where the commercial materials are being stored. Are they been properly identified? Fire extinguisher must easily be located, readily be available. This is what the work site analysis has to be done. In terms of maintenance and housekeeping, ensure that this is being properly proper housekeeping is been done. So there has to be a proper cleaning process, there has to be proper segregation of stuff, be it the fuel, be it the ignition, and so on and so forth. So regular maintenance should be followed, and good housekeeping will prevent all fires which have been talking around it. Last but not the least is training. Make everyone the partner or stakeholder, because at the end of the day it might be catastrophic and human lives might be lost. So nothing like it as a training can. With this, I come to an end of this presentation. Thank you for watching this video.